Hi, I'm Chris Pocknee. I'm a PhD student with the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Queensland and part of the NESP Threatened Species Recovery Hub. I'm looking at how fire impacts the northern bettong and how cats may play into this interaction by applying a predation pressure as well. Hi, I'm Chris Pockney. I'm a PhD student with the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Queensland and part of the NESP Threatened Species Recovery Hub. My research is looking into the various ways that fire may impact the northern bettong and whether cats play into this interaction as well. So a couple of acknowledgements before I get started. The Yagara people whose country I am recording this from and the Bulwai people whose country my fieldwork takes place on. I'd like to recognise and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And also, being a very collaborative project, the Northern Bettong Recovery Team. So there's no way this would have been possible without the input of the recovery team, and particularly individuals from Queensland Parks, the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, James Cook University, WWF Australia, and of course the traditional owners whose land we find bettong habitat on. So a quick intro to the northern bettong. It's an endangered species and it falls within the critical weight range, so suitable prey size for cats and foxes. Thankfully, we don't find foxes as far north as the bettong's range, but there are cats in the region. And we think of the bettong as being both fire dependent and fire sensitive. So they do depend on fire to maintain the open sclerophyll habitat that they rely on. But too much fire or too high intensity fire will result in a lack of ground cover, which the bettongs rely on for nesting and foraging and things like this. We think we've lost about 90% of the population size of bettongs since European colonisation. And in the last few decades, we've lost at least 2 known populations. And this has resulted in a decline in the area of occupancy of the species of about 70% in this time. So we've just got these 2 remaining populations now. This larger population is within the lamb range. So this is just at the edge of the Atherton tablelands near Mareeba. And then a little bit further north, we have a population that's actually was recently rediscovered as part of a WWF research project. And this is at Mount Spurgeon in Mount Lewis National Park. We think the major contributing threats to these declines of fire regimes, so mainly through a lack of fire and habitat closing up, rainforest encroachment, that sort of thing. Possibly predation by feral cats and the interaction of these 2 factors. So we know that in some areas cats come into an area following a burn, but we haven't seen this specifically yet in the wet tropics, so that's a factor of interest. So my project came into that based on these hypothesised threats, and so I wanted to look at the response of bettongs as a population and individually to fire. So in terms of how we're looking as a population, we carried out mark recapture surveys. And so this is from last year's surveys, population estimates you can see here. They are slightly lower than the most recent population estimates, which were by Tegan Whitehead as part of her PhD thesis through James Cook University. But you can see I've got quite wide confidence intervals here, result of a low number of recaptures and also only having the 2 primary trapping events, so 1 week each before and after fire at each of my study sites. We have Lower Davies Creek and Upper Davies Creek. Importantly, no evidence of an impact of management burns on bettong numbers, so the pre and post fire numbers compare pretty favourably here. And we also have no evidence for a decline in things like reproductive success, body condition, and that type of thing. In terms of how individual bettongs respond to fire, we put GPS collars on some bettongs during the mark recapture surveys. We had a few issues with some of the collars, but these are the results from 4 of them that we did retrieve with usable data. And you can see basically there's no consistent trend here. These 2 down the bottom, the bettongs contracted their range post-fire. So the post-fire range is shown by the red outline compared to the blue outline being the habitat that was used by the bettong before the fire. And you can see these 2 down the bottom, they've really contracted into mainly unburnt areas. So this sort of gives us a bit of a hint that low intensity burns that result in a bit of a habitat matrix with patches of grass and things like that left unburnt are important. And then you've got these two up the top that basically don't tell us a whole lot. The fire intensity mapping that I used is not perfect. It is prone to error through things like cloud cover, and also depending on the density of the canopy in terms of whether it gives us really an accurate representation of how a mid-story or ground layer might look. But to date, this is the most accurate representation that we've got. And I think my main takeaway from this is that we need more data. We need to deploy more collars, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. Other outcomes from my other research methods, no cats detected on camera traps, which we deployed targeted for feral cats. So this is obviously good news for bettongs within the lamb range, as well as the other small and medium mammals and birds and reptiles and things like that that share this habitat. Strong recovery of habitat following fire. So I've been carrying out vegetation surveys for fire and then repeating these surveys about every 6 months following burns. And the ground layers bounce back really strongly. So it's a good sign, and it shows that these management burns in this habitat do work, and it sort of shows us why there's no negative impact of these burns on bettongs, that there are patches of grass left and the bits that are burnt do bounce back quite quickly. Through my trapping surveys and mark recapture work, I'm also contributing to other data sets. So things like northern quolls, northern brown bandicoots turn up in traps as well. So we get data on these species, and they are species of interest for other work that's going on. And also contributing to the management of northern bettong populations and habitats. So in the lamb range, as well as other bettong habitat, and potentially habitat where bettongs might be reintroduced or translocated going forward. As I touched on, I do need to do some more GPS collaring and mark recapture surveys around a burn event. Unfortunately, that was planned for this year, but was pushed to the side with the uncertainty and regulations around COVID earlier in the year. So I'm in the process of coming up with a bit of a plan to address that, and working around another burn event in the next year or so, hopefully. So I'd just like to finish by thanking all my research partners and also funding sources, and thank you for listening.